Well, good Sunday evening, folks. It is February the 7th, and I'm so glad that you have decided to join us as we continue our Bible study in the book of Proverbs. It's going to be our last month in the book of Proverbs. We may not get through it entirely, but if we don't, we will just fall short by a couple of chapters. That is okay. We're going to begin a new study in the month of March, and I hope that you will be here for that. Now, we're going to actually, Lord willing, if everything goes well, you know this, I've mentioned it a couple of times in our classes together. We are planning, of course, to begin in-person Bible classes again on Sunday evening at the beginning of March. And so we will begin a new subject, a new topic, a new text at the beginning of March. But we will continue to live stream. If you are unable to come out and join us live and in person, you will be able to tune in online. And so if you can't come in person, and I hope you can, then please continue to tune in online for our Bible studies at the beginning of March. But let's, in the meantime, here in the month of February, finish up the book of Proverbs, or get as far as we can. We're in chapter 25. And so if you've got your Bibles, Proverbs chapter 25 is where you're at. We come to a new section. That section begins in chapter 25. It goes through chapter 29. So 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. 5 chapters that really in some ways constitute a separate book within Proverbs. Now, it's not separate in the sense of material because it is Proverbs, but it's separate in the sense that it was compiled and it was edited by someone else. Take a look at verse 1. These also are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, the king of Judah, transcribed. So Solomon is still the source of these, but these particular ones were compiled by the scribes of King Hezekiah. Hezekiah, in case you're wondering, reigned from about 716 BC to about 686 BC. And so they compiled these Proverbs, they edited these Proverbs, and as in Proverbs chapter 10 through Proverbs chapter 19, these individual Proverbs are organized into small collections. And so with that in mind, let's start taking a look at these Proverbs of Solomon, which were compiled and edited by the scribes, the men of Hezekiah. Verses 2 through 7. These verses are basically deal with relating to a king or dealing with kings. Let's look at verse 2 and 3. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter. So what in the world does that mean? It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. The idea seems to be that, a certain level of mystery increases a sense of wonder, a sense of awe. And that's true. So the first part of it seems to be pretty understandable. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It, just some mysterious things just enhance His glory. But the second part, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter. Now, we have to understand a little bit about how things worked in the ancient world in terms of, let's say, academics and scholarship. Most ordinary people didn't have access to higher education. That just basically didn't exist, except for in the king's court. The king had access to resources. The king had access to counsel. The king had the resources that were necessary in order to deal with all of the affairs of state. And part of dealing with the affairs of state, of course, a central part of that was every aspect of science, philosophy and theology and the hard sciences. And so the kings and the courts of the kings were all about explaining the truth and explaining the mysteries of life. And so the glory of kings is to search out a matter. And so basically what it's saying here is people are honored. It's typical to honor people who uncover truth. And we can appreciate that, right? Oh my goodness. We give out awards, major awards, to people who uncover great truths, especially in the scientific area, that can change lives dramatically. And so the glory of kings is to search out a matter. In the ancient world, those people were the kings and those closest to the kings. Okay, verse 3. As the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the heart of kings is unsearchable. Again, this says something about the unique status of kings in the ancient world and the access that they had to information. Good rulers appear wise. As the heavens for height, the earth for depth, so the heart of the king is unsearchable. They just have the resources. They have hopefully, the mental resources and a lot of other resources to deal with the affairs of state. So good kings are wise people. Okay, look at verse 4. Take away the dross from the silver, and there comes out a vessel for the smith. Take away the wicked before the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Okay, look at these two. These are really important. Take away the dross from the silver. It pictures here the whole process of removing impurities from silver in order to create a thing of beauty. If you're going to have a beautiful finished silver product, you got to get rid of the impurities. Take away the dross from the silver, and there comes out a vessel for the silversmith. It's beautiful. Well, in the same way, verse 5, take away the wicked before the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. For a kingdom to thrive, for a community to be stable and at peace, a king has to remove evil from the kingdom. Now, of course, you can't do that in an absolute sense. There's always going to be evil. But this is talking about evil has to be confronted and evil has to be dealt with. And if it's not confronted and if it is not dealt with strongly, if it is allowed to run rampant, it is to destruction of society. It will not be a beautiful society. Listen, we see that all over the world. In places where corruption is so systemic and deeply rooted, and there is no accountability, and in places like that, nobody wants to live in a place like that. It is a terrible place to live. People don't want to invest there. People don't want to take their families there. And so it's a great image that is used here that Solomon uses. If you want a beautiful silver vessel, the silversmith has to take away the dross, the impurities. If you want a kingdom, if you want a community that is beautiful, that is desirable, a king has to confront evil and deal with it. Okay, verse 6 and 7. Do not claim honor in the presence of the king, and do not stand in the place of great men. For it is better that it be said to you, come up here, than for you to be placed lower in the presence of the prince whom your eyes have seen. This is all about the danger of self-promotion. Don't promote yourself. That is a recipe for humiliation and disaster. This is talking about assuming a posture of humility in the presence of a superior. If you don't want to be humiliated, assume a posture of humility. Don't claim honor in the presence of the king. Don't stand in the place of great men. It's better for you to assume a posture of humility and them to invite you up rather than for you to take the posture of greatness and be told, oh, listen, I'm sorry, this is reserved for someone else. It reminds me of Luke chapter 14. Take a look at Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14, verse 7 when you get there. Luke chapter 14. All right, I'm almost there. There we go. Verse 7. Jesus began speaking a parable to the invited guests when he noticed how they had been picking out the places of honor at the table and saying to them, when you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for someone more distinguished than you may have been invited by him. Oh, that's presumptuous. I walk in and I assume that, I'm supposed to be at the head table. That's not a posture of humility. That is a posture of arrogance. And he says, and he who invited you both will come and say to you, excuse me, you need to give up your place to this man. And then in disgrace, you proceed to occupy the last place. But when you are invited, Jesus says, go and recline at the last place. So when the one who has invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher, and then you will have honor in the sight of all who are at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. That is the principle that even Jesus, of course, is endorsing there in Luke chapter 14. A posture of humility, the danger of self-promotion. We mustn't forget that. Okay, verse 8. Verses 8 through 10 is about settling disputes without litigation. Let's read it. 8 through 10. Do not go out hastily to argue your case. Otherwise, what will you do in the end when your neighbor humiliates you? Argue your case with your neighbor and do not reveal the secret of another, or he who hears it will reproach you, and the evil report about you will not pass away. Okay, let's break this down a little bit. First of all, in verse 8, do not go out hastily to argue your case. Otherwise, what will you do in the end when your neighbor humiliates you? Don't make hasty judgments or jump to conclusions. Well, that's really hard for a lot of us. Don't make hasty judgments. Don't jump to conclusions. You may have to eat your words. You know, you see this a lot of times, like on the news. You know, in the age of social media, so many people are so quick to hit send. They'll just say something, they'll draw a conclusion, they'll hit send, and it's out for all the world to see, and they'll have to retract that or delete their tweet, or there'll be a retraction in their paper. They were hasty in their judgment. They jumped to conclusions. And we live in a world that is hasty in judgments and jumps to conclusions. Don't be like that. Then we get down to verse 9. Argue your case with your neighbor. Do not reveal the secret of another. Argue your case with your neighbor. Keep the quarrel between you and another party. Try not to escalate it. That's always in everyone's best interest. If there is something going on between you, a quarrel between you, try to settle it in private. And do not reveal the secret of another, the second part of verse 9. If you violate a confidence, you're going to lose reputation, he goes on to say in verse 10. Or he who hears it will reproach you, and the evil report about it you will not pass away. So, don't violate a confidence. You'll lose reputation. Try to keep quarrels between yourself and another. Try to settle matters outside of a legal context. Hey, you know, we went to Luke chapter 14 a minute ago. Hey, let's go to Luke chapter 12. When you think about that, Jesus has something to say about that as well. Luke chapter 12, look down at about verse 57. Luke chapter 12, verse 57. And why do you not even on your own initiative judge what is right? For while you are going with your opponent to appear before the magistrate on your way there, make an effort to settle with him so that he may not drag you before the judge, and the judge turn you over to the officer, and the officer throw you into prison. I say to you, you will not get out of there until you have paid the last cent. Always try. It's always preferable, if possible, to deal with things, settle legal matters outside of a legal setting. So some great counsel there in verses 8 through 10. Don't make hasty judgments. Don't jump to conclusion. Keep confidences, or it's going to ruin your reputation. And try to settle matters without having it escalate to a courtroom setting when there is a dispute between you and someone else. Man, great counsel. Okay, verse 11. Like apples of gold in settings of silver is a word spoken in right circumstances. Like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a wise reprover to a listening ear. Okay, these two verses talk about fine jewelry and fine counsel. Apples of gold in settings of silver. That's a description of a piece of jewelry. Sounds exquisite. And it was exquisite. And that's the point. It's from a jeweler's perspective, he's describing a masterpiece of jewelry. And he's saying, listen, the right use of words an artistic use of words, we might say, is like a jewelry masterpiece. At least it is to a person who is willing to accept those words, a good listener, good correction. And that's what he's talking about in verse 12. Like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold, like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a wise reprover to a listening ear. A wise reprover is someone who chooses the right words. And a listening ear is for those who are willing to listen to reproof. Someone who is willing to listen to a wise reprover. It's like being given a jeweled masterpiece. The value that has done for you. So, two things here are important to remember. Be a person who can receive reproof and be a person who chooses wonderful words in giving reproof. Words that will truly benefit that person. Fine jewelry and fine counsel. Fine counsel is like fine jewelry. Okay, let's look at verse 13 and 14. This is all about reliable and unreliable people. Like the cold of snow in the time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him, for he refreshes the soul of his masters. Like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts of his gifts falsely. Okay, verse 13, first of all. Like the cold of snow in the time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him. Now, it almost sounds like he's saying, oh, it's so great in the harvest time if a big snow comes. No, that's not a good thing. That is a disaster. And second of all, not only is it a disaster, but it's improbable. A big snow during a time of harvest is very improbable over there. They couldn't really identify with that. What the idea here is, this is like someone bringing something cool and refreshing to the harvesters. That's the idea. You're out on a hot day and, working in the fields and it's brutally hot and you're exhausted. And the ice cream truck comes by, or somebody brings a truck and they have tubs of ice cream and it's break time and we've got the ice cream. Man, people are going to be running brought the snow cone machine. People are going to be flocking to that. It's just going to pick up morale. It is going to be so good in a time like that. That's the idea here. Bringing relief. Good people in a time of stress, in a time of difficulty, people who come with good words are like someone who brings something refreshing and cool, the relief of something refreshing and cool in a hot environment. Okay, that's reliable people. They're like the snow cone machine on a hot day. Unreliable people is verse 14. Like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts of his gifts falsely. A man who boasts of his gifts falsely. This is a person who makes empty promises. They promise something and you get your hopes up, but it's a disappointment. It's just a tease and it's such a disappointment. Those kind of people are like clouds and wind without rain. You desperately need wind and you see something that looks like in the distance that it's going to bring that much needed rain and relief to the situation. And it passes you by and not a drop. Oh, it teased you. And it was so disappointing. Reliable and unreliable people. We don't want to be unreliable people. We want to be like the snow cone machine, like the pitcher of ice cold lemonade on a hot day. Okay, look at verse 15. Be patient with authorities. That's what this is all about. By forbearance, a ruler may be persuaded. By forbearance, a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue breaks the bone. Now let's first of all talk about a bone for a little bit. A bone here expresses something that is very hard. Bones are incredibly hard. It is amazing what God has done in creating the skeletal system. Bones are so hard. And so talking about the soft tongue breaks the bone, this is talking about the most hardened resistance to an idea. By forbearance, a ruler may be persuaded, a soft tongue breaks the bone. It expresses the power of persuasion. By forbearance, just be patient. Be patient as you're talking with someone who's in authority and you think there's a great idea, there's a great course of action that should be taken. They may resist it at first. That's okay. Don't try to, bull rush it. Just kind of be patient, patiently explain, continue to deal with it in a very patient way, a persuasive way. And those words typically, they have power. It's not an ironclad guarantee. It is a proverb after all. But nevertheless, the power of persuasive words. Okay, let's look at verse 16. Verses 16 all the way through verse 27, basically the end of the chapter, is all talking about exercising caution with people. Look at verse 16 and 17. I like this one. Have you found honey? Eat only what you need, that you not have it in excess and vomit it. Let your foot rarely be in your neighbor's house, or he will become weary of you and hate you. Okay. Honey is great, in other words. Honey is great. And in the ancient world, it was also seen to have a lot of real, practical medicinal value, health benefits. Honey's great until it's not. Honey's great until you've had too much of it. Have you found honey? Eat only what you need, so that you won't have an excess and vomit it. You eat too much, it ain't good. With that in mind, likewise, he says, your friends will get tired of you if you're around too much. Verse 17, let your foot, like honey, let your foot rarely be in your neighbor's house, or he will become weary of you and hate you. Don't wear out your welcome. Don't wear it out. Just keep that in mind. Your friends, it's such interesting. Isn't that great? I think I don't know, was it Benjamin Franklin who said fish and company both start stinking after 3 days or something like that? It just kind of popped into my head. I'd have to look that up. But it's true. It's in the Bible. Hey, listen, you got friends? Oh, great. Just respect their space and respect their time, or they're going to get tired of you. All right. Verse 18. 18 through 20. Like a club and a sword and a sharp arrow is a man who bears false witness against his neighbor. These are people we need to be wary of. We need to beware of people like this. Like a club and a sword and a sharp arrow, those are very dangerous weapons. Is a man who bears false witness against his neighbor. The perjurer, people who lie. We talked about this so much in everything that is said in the book of Proverbs about liars and lying in court and being a lying witness. They are destructive. Perjurers are destructive to relationships. Beware of them. Verse 19. Like a bad tooth and an unsteady foot is confidence in a faithless man in time of trouble. A faithless man in time of trouble. Don't put your trust in an unreliable person. Listen, there's some people who are, some aspects of them, you like them and all, but, when it comes to reliability, there's some people I know that I like them. They're nice, but I've just learned that they're unreliable. You know people like that. And so I would never, ever recommend them for certain things. Or put my trust in them. Don't put your trust in an unreliable person in a critical moment. That's what I was talking about. It's going to prove excruciatingly painful if you do. That's what I mean. It's going to be like a bad tooth and an unsteady foot. You have an injured foot, and in a critical moment you need it, and you jump out on that foot, and you just collapse. That's what it is if you put your trust in an unreliable person. Okay, number 20, verse 20. Like one who takes off a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar on soda, is he who sings songs to a troubled heart. Like one who takes off a garment on a cold day. Yeah, that is uncomfortable. That's just appropriate. Cold day, taking off your garment. Or vinegar and soda there, or like vinegar on soda. This is the kind of person, that's what it's like, a person who sings songs to a troubled heart. The idea is this, sometimes people may, they may be in a very depressed state. Some events of life, they may have been on the receiving end of some awful hard things, and they are just in a moment in which their heart is so heavy and they're grieving. And there's some people who actually believe, well, I just need to come along and cheer them up. I just need to take them to the party. I just need to tell them a joke. I just need to get them laughing. And the point here is, listen, that is inappropriate. Trying to be upbeat to the depressed person just makes matters worse. It's like taking off your coat on a cold day. Sensitive people, he's saying, know how to sorrow with the sorrowing. Be a sensitive person. Understand the temperature of the room. If someone's hurting, don't try to cheer them up. Grieve with them while it's appropriate. Okay, verse 21 and 22. Strange but true here. If an enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. That's strange. It's a strange idea. If an enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. In other words, demonstrate acts of kindness to those who hate you. In other words, don't take revenge. That's the natural impulse. Don't do that. Respond with acts of kindness. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink, for you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. It's really hard to kind of pin down what he means when he says you'll heap burning coals on his head. We see this idea also over in the New Testament. But probably the idea is it's going to bring them to shame. It was a culture, they lived in a culture of shame. And some have suggested the idea here is that brings them to shame, and that has a far greater likelihood of them responding then appropriately when they find themselves in a shamed position. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that it doesn't envision the possibility of reconciliation at all. And this person needs to be shamed because of their behavior. They need to experience those kinds of consequences. And but the impulse is no vengeance, or the impulse is to have vengeance. God's counsel is no vengeance. Look at verse 23. Cold rain and cold looks. Let's look at it. Verse 23. The north wind brings forth rain, and a backbiting tongue, an angry countenance. Gossip and slander brings angry looks, in other words. It's talking about the destructive nature of gossip. And it's, if you engage in that, then there's going to be consequences to that. Not only does it bring destruction, but you're going to lose reputation and respect. Verse 24, we've seen this. It's almost verbatim with what we already saw in chapter 21 and verse 9. It's better to live in a corner of the roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman. A contentious and quarrelsome person is also destructive. We won't spend any more time with that since we've spent time with that before. We're about at minute 29, but we've only got about 4 verses left, so let's just finish up this chapter. Like cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from a distant land. This is all about good water and bad water, pleasant words that come unexpectedly, just refresh us. They refresh us mentally and emotionally. Last week I talked to a person at church. I just said, listen, I've been meaning to talk to you. And they had sent me this very, very, very thoughtful card. And it was like cold, refreshing water. And I remember getting it and pulling it out of the mailbox and set it there on the island. I wanted Leola to see it, and she came in and she said, "Oh my," and she read it and goes, "That is such a gracious and thoughtful note." I go, "I know. It is so gracious." And that's what this reminds me of. Like cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from a distant land. So pleasant words that come unexpectedly just refresh us. Verse 26, like a trampled spring and a polluted well is a righteous man who gives way before the wicked. A righteous man who gives way before the wicked. What that is describing is a righteous person, a good man gone bad. Oh, it happens. Now, I know we saw over in chapter 24 and verse 15, if you remember that, it says, the righteous man falls 7 times and rises again, but the wicked stumble in a time of calamity. And we talked about the resilience of righteousness and people who are God-fearing and try to honor God's principles, and they're trusting in God, and so they're getting up when they're knocked down. But occasionally, this reminds us that even righteous people can go bad. And when that's happened, it brings profound disillusionment. It's like a trampled spring and a polluted well. Righteous people who become corrupt is like good water source that has been polluted. There is nothing that is more, just overwhelming in terms of its, pain than a water source, a desperately needed water source that is no longer usable. Powerful imagery there. Verse 27, it's not good to eat much honey, nor is it glory to search out one's own glory. We always saw about the whole honey thing, but this is kind of a difficult passage to understand. The second part, nor is it glory to search out one's own glory, it probably looks back to verse 2. Remember in verse 2, the glory of kings is to search out a matter? And we talked about how kings, and they were in a special position in the ancient world to uncover mysteries and explain things. It's not glory to search out one's own glory. So the idea here is, seems to maybe be more along the idea of self-promotion. Some have said, have suggested that. Others have see it in Hebrew as kind of a different take, that, the wise person can never get enough of unraveling riddles of the sages. But, it's a difficult verse. No need to spend a lot of time on that. Finally, look at verse 28. Like a city that is broken into and without walls is a man who has no control over his spirit. Like a city that is broken into and without walls. Walls were so critical in defense of the ancient cities in ancient times. They were absolutely critical, and because there were outside threats everywhere. And so the image here, a city that's broken into and without walls, is the man who has no control over his spirit. In other words, a lack of self-control makes one vulnerable. A city without walls makes that city vulnerable. If we don't have self-control, we are vulnerable. If we don't have self-control, we're always going to be outmaneuvered by those who know how to keep their emotions in check. We're going to be outmaneuvered by them. We're going to be outmaneuvered by Satan. Self-control is absolutely critical to success. Okay. That was great. We finished chapter 25. Next week, let's pick up on 26 as we continue this section. Listen, thanks for joining me today for Bible studies. As we continue to look at the book of Proverbs. I hope you have a great week this week. I hope I'll see you again in Bible study this Wednesday night here online and next Lord's Day. Until then, take care and God bless.